time now is 9:27 p.m. and we are back in open session. The board took no action in closed session. Trustees, we're now on to agenda item 4, discussion of internal audit investigation related to personnel in the Human Capital Management Department. Mr. Seaman. I think what we'll do first is if you will give us an update as it relates to items as posted, and then we'll allow trustees the opportunity to be able to clarify any information that you have or ask any questions of the information that you present. Okay.
During the course of an investigation by the Office of Internal Audit on an employee, we came across additional information in the scope of that particular investigation, and it became of such significance and concern that we were working toward determining how to communicate that in the normal process of how we do our reports on investigation. A memo was prepared anticipating that we would bring that to this board in December. With additional, I asked for that memo to be prepared. It's prepared for me under my signature. It was not delivered to this board on the meeting of December 18th. And the reason for that is that as we were preparing it, we had discussions, and it was decided that we need to do some more work, specifically since it involved upper level administrator. We wanted to get an outside investigator to look at our evidence at that point to determine if there was significant probable cause in order to bring it to this body to determine if an investigation by an outside investigator should be conducted. As a result of that decision to go to the outside investigator, I delayed delivering the memo to the trustees. It was not delivered to you on December 18th. Has not been delivered to you at all at this point in time. No investigation at this point has been initiated by the Office of Internal Audit besides the original investigation that was started. And so at this point in time, I've had to assign another investigator to that case. They have been reading and catching up on the materials. We will continue to evaluate the evidence we have attained at this point, and we will determine what additional work we need to do, and then here in the future we will be issuing a report on investigation.
Trustees, are there any questions?
Sure.
Trustee Fuller?
Mr. Singleton.
Yes, ma'am.
Who do you work for?
The Board of Trustees.
And you found it not important to bring that kind of information to the Board of Trustees?
The information that we found was important. It's critical and concerning. And the investigative staff and myself felt like we needed to process that and get it forward. The typical protocol and process for any report on investigation that our office has done in the past has been to finish that report and then present it to the administration. There was no discussion at the time to bring it to the board, because we were trying to finish an investigation, and it would come through in that manner.
Let me understand. You're saying that you finish the report and then give it to the administration and not the board?
Now, we did not finish, we have not finished one now, just want to clarify, we have not finished a report yet, but the normal process is, yes, in an investigation, it's completed, the report is written, and it is delivered to the administration.
And not to the board?
That's correct. Not initially. Now, the board can always ask for it, and there have been instances where we have made a presentation to the board on an investigation, but the administration already had it too.
Do you attend the internal audit meetings? Do you attend internal audit meetings?
Yes, ma'am.
The committee meetings?
Committee, yes, ma'am.
Okay, do you bring those reports forth to the internal audit committee before
Yes, we
you
do.
give it? Excuse me?
Yes, ma'am.
Before you give it to the administration?
No, the investigations go to the administration before they go to the audit committee.
Did you tell any of the board members about the investigation?
On the original employee or other employees in human capital management?
Either.
Either. The original investigation was communicated to all of the trustees at one point because a list of all of the current investigations was communicated to the trustees through your Friday packet. The potential of an investigation on additional employees beyond the initial individual was discussed in general with one trustee, chairman of our audit committee.
And no other trustees?
No, ma'am.
And
Not that I recall.
And when did you give the information to the administration?
After the December 18th memo was not delivered, it was in early January that we decided that there was information regarding these instant messages that's pretty well known at this point, was of such critical nature that we needed to bring that forward. And so on January the 7th, that information was given to the superintendent.
And that's the only other person that had the information?
At that time.
Okay, I'll pass to the second one.
Okay. Trustee Mitchell?
I'll pass for right now. That's-
I'm going to pass one right now.
Okay.
Oh,
No, I'm not gonna pass.
Trustee Butler?
And I'm always trying to put things in context. Now, the investigation started in about September, early September.
It was originally, I made the decision to initiate it on September the 3rd.
September the 3rd. 3rd or 30th?
3rd.
3rd, okay. So we began the investigation October the 3rd, September 3rd.
Yes, sir.
And somewhere around the first or middle part of October, the investigation led down a different path
That would be a fair statement.
with the messages. And in October, when you went down a different path than originally, you did not inform the superintendent, nor did you inform the board, nor did you inform the chair of the audit committee of your initial findings.
That's correct.
And as you were looking further into those initial findings about the messages, what was going on with as far as the investigation as to from October to January?
Okay. In October, we obtained emails and these instant messages from our IT, district's IT department.
Okay.
The evaluation and review of those messages continued through probably the better part of October, maybe even to early November. And so that was an ongoing piece of it, trying to assemble that into a good knowledge base so we could see what the patterns were. At the same time that that work is going on, the investigator is scheduling interviews with staff that were persons of interest, or whatever term you want to call, related back to the original investigation. And so those were being scheduled and conducted through October, through November, and probably the last one occurred December 2nd and 3rd, I believe were the dates. So the investigation was moving forward with the original allegations on the original investigation that we had started all the way through October, all the way through November, and into December. And then as we were getting into December and we had our last interview that we thought at that time in early December, we started pulling all of this together, all the information that we received, and that's when I asked a member of the staff to begin to draft a letter with the intent that we might expand it to one of the senior administrators, and that we would have to bring that to the Board of Trustees for you to decide what to do.
So you learned about these messages in October.
Yes, sir.
In December, you contemplated informing the board about it.
Yes, sir.
Approximately 2 months later.
Correct.
And you did not inform the board in December.
No, we did not.
And you did not inform the board about it in January.
No, we did not.
I'm going to say we. I heard about it through the media.
Yes, sir.
And I believe we got a letter from you either that day or the day before,
It was that evening.
advising us that the media was going to run a story. Is there a reason why the board should not have known about a top-level person in this administration and the egregious comments that were made? Is there a particular reason why the board was not informed earlier?
I go back to the comments I said earlier about the protocol, being that typically those investigations are reported to the administration for them to act on, because they are personnel related, and so they are going to have to, the administration is going to have to make that decision. We do many investigations throughout the year, and they were all being handled that way. There was also the decision that was made then in early January, where because of the nature of those messages, to follow policy CAA local and to present them to the superintendent. That policy says that any allegation against an employee for moral, ethical, or behavior conduct not involving fraud or financial impropriety would be reported to the superintendent and HCM. We could not report them to HCM since they were the subject matter, and we reported them to the superintendent on January 7th.
And not in October?
No, sir.
And not in November?
No, sir.
And not in December?
January 7th.
I'm having a hard time understanding why the Internal Audit Department did not speak to the superintendent about such an egregious statements that were made by very high-level chiefs, and why that was put on the back burner. It appears it was put on the back burner because you said you continue with the initial investigation and you kind of put this aside. Do we not have enough investigators to have gone down this second trail?
No, sir, I don't think that was the issue. I think part of the timing issue becomes in the interviewing of the individuals that we wished to get to. The subject of the original investigation was critical to us to get that interview done, and we wanted to get that done before we stated anything about these instant messages, because if the instant messages had come out maybe prior to that, and this is just supposition on my part, then it might have we would have had probably a reluctant witness, and it might have tainted the testimony. And that's just my professional judgment.
Forgive me, but I'm still trying to understand why such an egregious act is put on the back burner. Now, CAA local, you say, requires that the superintendent be made aware of it. But your staff was aware of it in October and did not inform the superintendent. Aware of it in November did not inform the superintendent. In December, and then not until early January. Why did it take the internal audit department 3 months to do what policy said?
In October, November, and December, as those messages became more concrete as we analyzed them, the thought was that we were going to wrap that investigation of the individuals involved into the original investigation and make it all one report, because they were interconnected, and it kind of had influence on the other part of the investigation. So they were so connected, we were having a difficult time separating them into different reports. And so while we're working that case, we're really only working one case. And so that was the thinking, is through October, November, December, build that case, and then make one report that includes everything. And that was on schedule. Would have probably come out in January or February of this year, until we get to the point that we decided to look at an outside investigator, and that slowed it down. And then my investigator resigned at the same time.
Let me say that I'm very disappointed that it took at least 3 months for the superintendent to find out about it. I'm disappointed that you still have not started an investigation into the messages. Am I correct?
No, we have not.
Is there a reason why we still have not looked further into those messages?
First, we're trying to finish the original investigation. Second, the main parties to those instant messages are no longer employees of the district. And so the question becomes, at what level should we investigate that? Or is the investigation done because they have resigned?
Yeah. And I'm not sure if it's your department that should do the investigation or an outside investigation.
Yes, I understand.
But I would sense that if that type of conversation was going on between 2 people and maybe 3 people, that there may be others, that the culture was ripe for them to feel comfortable making such egregious statements. I would hope that we would take our time to look further into the HCM department to see if there's other like statements and like-minded people that are still there. I would hope that we will look deeper than just the top person and one of her lieutenants. My suspicion is that it grows deeper. We have not gotten to the roots. Thank you.
Trustee Bingham?
Yeah, I know that the timeline seems to be in question a lot here. But if I remember correctly, on December 18th, that was a board meeting, and it was a very late night because I didn't get home till 2 o'clock. And the next day, correct me if I'm wrong, I think everybody got out for Christmas vacation. Was that right? December 19th?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then they didn't come back into the January 5th was when the district reopened. So we were basically on a 2.5-week shutdown, and we normally don't want to call our employees in off of vacation, especially during the holiday season. You know, I'm glad that we take time on investigations because these are people's careers. And it does concern me that a report is given on December 18th, and I would hope with any report from any investigator, because you are at the top of that particular section, that even if it's a real trusted investigator, that you would take the time to truly vet the report and check it out. What really gives me pause or concern here is that the very investigator who did this quit. And then we'll never really know how quickly the administration and Mr. Singleton could act, because the report was leaked to the media. And, you know, hey guys, you got to get your information any way you can. But still, it looks to me like if we got back from vacation on the 5th, and you're taking some time, you wanted to vet it some, and then Superintendent Miles got it on the 7th, and once again, I would hope that, and by the way, how many pages were these emails that we're talking about?
The ones that were given to the superintendent were just a summary.
No, but
it was 99. It was 99 pages.
That was a summary for 99.
But there was another 75 or 80 pages.
Okay, so we had over 400 pages of information, and it takes time to go through those. I would hope that any person would take the time to once again vet it, and especially when it comes to a person that's in a pretty important position, chief of our human capital. I don't see that a two-week window is a slow window in making a decision on a person's career. I think it was thoughtfully done. The superintendent and Mr. Singleton weighed out the evidence that they had, and then they took appropriate action. Now, having said that, I have to say this. 4 years ago, the Star Commission was formed to investigate and audit our Human Resources Department to see how effective they were. These were people that were put on a commission that were appointed. Each trustee had an opportunity to appoint a person to this commission. Our Human Resources was shown to be completely broken. And so, yes, we've had some things that happened over there. These statements, of course, they should have been fired for them, because these poor judgment call, if nothing else. But I don't think we should overlook the fact that we've had a human resources officer who came in from Houston as a human resources officer there, who did an outstanding job of doing some major overhauls from the Star Commission. And Mr. Superintendent, I would hope that, or maybe President Solis, what we might want to do at some point is to have an outside, maybe that commission, the original Star Commission or something like that, to take a second look at our human resources to see just how far they've come along. But the reason we did this Star Commission report is that the system was broken. We were not getting teachers into the classrooms, and it was a very flawed system. So I don't think we should overlook the work that has been done. So, having said that, people make judgment errors. I'm sure Brian Williams, and by the way, it just took 12 years for NBC to figure that one out. I'm glad that y'all were doing this a little bit faster. People make errors. Unfortunately for some people in our district, their errors cost them their job, and I think justifiably so, because these were errors in judgment that can't be overlooked. But I think our superintendent made the appropriate decision in a timely manner. Mr. Singleton, I think you made an appropriate decision in a very timely manner. So thank you both for your work.
Trustee Nuttall.
Mr. Singleton, you said you delivered them to the superintendent on January the 7th?
Correct.
And the reason for just giving them to the superintendent is why?
To follow the normal protocol, and that was to take any allegations to the superintendent that involve employee behavior according to policy CAA local.
And as of to date, we don't have an investigation active investigation, correct?
except for the original one.
that started on September the 3rd.
Correct.
Because in the instant message, because you investigate fraud, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
I see a lot of things that's dealing with fake vacant position, federal compliance, and if the DMA find out, I see a lot that's dealing with pay structure not going through the proper. So that would kind of relate to fraud, correct?
Right, and let me correct one statement, and I should have told you this, is that there is one part of this that we have begun an internal audit on, and that is some of those pay amounts for federal dollars that we are looking at, have just begun that to look at.
And I see some reference that's dealing with our HB1 visa that we pay these employees. So you're saying you have an internal audit, not an investigation?
Right. We will look at the financial impact of what's going on at this point to determine that and see where those dollars went. Now, it is not unusual. It has happened in the past that as we do an audit, if we see other policy violations that an individual committed, then we will open up a formal investigation into that individual.
So the administration looks into policy violation and internal audit looks into fraud, misappropriation of funds, correct?
Correct. And
So once again,
I guess theoretically we all look at policy violations.
yes, but I know you said you didn't give it to the board because it was under the preview of the superintendent. So that's why the board did not know about it, because it didn't fall under for you to investigate. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But I'm looking at the instant messengers and they talk about fraud and misappropriation of funds. So why is there not an investigation on that aspect of the federal compliance? Why is there not an investigation on that aspect? It's just internal audit.
Those aspects will be
Investigated or will be?
audited, where there's, having to do with financial dollars. Like I said, we've already started one, just in the beginning phases of using federal dollars for recruiting. And so we're going to look at that. There's not a whole lot to go on at this point, so we'll dig into that. I suspect that there will be other audits and or investigations that may come out of this information.
And who will make that decision? Because as well in the instant messengers, it talks about employees babysitting for another employee during work hours. So I mean, that is misappropriation of funds, and we can't do that. So who would make that decision to investigate?
Well, we'll do it internally in our staff.
Okay.
We sit down and we look at that and decide which ones are priority, highest risk, whatever particular issues. It's my understanding as of tonight that the administration may be doing some investigative work themselves, and so
On the administrative side, I understand.
on the administrative
So you're
side,
saying you're going to do an internal audit or investigation?
could be either or.
Either. And when will we make that determination?
Just as we go along, as we can do the work. We started the one, as I mentioned, and then I've just had the investigator that's been assigned to this job finish reviewing the case, and so she's proceeding with her part. And then as we finish the initial investigation, we'll evaluate what other steps need to be taken based on the information we have.
When's the last time that we did an internal audit on HCM?
We have done, just off the top of my head, a couple in the last year or two. One having to do with position control.
Okay.
That was an HCM internal audit. We did internal audit on the biometric, use of the biometric clock. Those are the two that popped in my head.
Okay,
There
so
might have
that's-
been more, but those I remember.
Okay, thank you. Superintendent Miles, you found out about this on January the 7th, 2015, with a meeting with Mike Singleton, is that correct?
That's right.
And
The
3 weeks,
Instant messages.
and you went through the instant messengers?
Yes, I went through the instant messages.
And so, to make a decision about the egregious instant messaging, what the process it took to make a active decision. I think on June the 29th is when the final January the 29th is when the final decision of the settlement. So it took 3 weeks to make that decision.
As a point of order, but this question is directly relevant to the next item on the agenda. I'm just wondering if we could delay that question until we get to that item.
Well, we're going to discuss the superintendent's response regarding the Human Capital Management Department and everything that has happened since then.
Well, isn't that what she just asked?
Well, no, I think she's asking the actual investigation process itself. So
Okay, I'm sorry.
this is part of the investigation process.
Okay.
Yeah. Continue, Trustee Noel.
So you, taking that.
Absolutely.
January the 7th is, and then these egregious, we didn't make a decision to June the 29th. And the reason why it took so long.
January, and I don't know, I don't remember what date exactly, January 23rd. Yes, I received the instant messages on January 7th from Mike Singleton, and it was part of a larger, I understood it to be discovered during another investigation, and he shared those with me. Obviously, there was a lot of them. I didn't read them there on the spot while I was in the room, but even reading a few of them, I was shocked and disappointed when I saw them. But despite those emotional feelings that I had an obligation to get more information, to really look at try to understand what was going on with these messages, read them carefully, look at the extent of who's implicated, what it would mean for HCM, but also follow due process. You heard earlier how long it takes internal audit to follow due process, and I had an obligation to at least do some of that due diligence. I also knew that it was complicated because there's another investigation going on, so I had to be careful there. But in the end of the day also, and this is the reason I think 2.5 weeks is reasonable, but one of the reasons why it took a little bit of time is because it was a tough decision. When you think about our people, especially a chief and others, actually anybody, especially on a decision like this, I think most people recognize I'm not afraid of making tough decisions, but I want to make sure I make a fair decision. And I knew that these would have grave implications. To be honest, I kind of felt right away that I would have to ask her to resign. But I was debating what the consequence should be. Whether I should ask her to resign, whether I could suspend her without pay and then send her to training, whether it should be a reprimand and sent to training and some other fine. And sometimes when you're too close to the problem, prudence would say you should get some other people's opinion, which I did, including most of my cabinet members' opinion. In the end of the day, though, the decision was mine, and I knew it. And no one asked me to come to that conclusion. No one suggested that to me. I myself came up with asking Carmen Darville to resign because of the gravity of the instant messages and because of the gravity of what was said in the instant messages. So that's what was going on during those 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks. And that was the decision that was made in the end.
Trustee Cohen?
Come back over 1 second now.
You refer to it as due process. I view it as hesitation. We have put people on administrative leave immediately for much more and for much less. There were other options, and you mentioned that you might have been too close to the situation. Severances were given for violations that I think did not deserve them.
There's proof, embarrassing proof, that we have violated possibly law. We've been violated public trust. This could have been handled much differently and much swifter. These instant messages are embarrassing, unprofessional, and we talk about the good that was done in HCM, but these missteps somewhat diminish that great work, because when we look at the work of the whole, what we see is the good work being shown to the public, and then we see what's being done in the background. Somewhat hypocritical. I'm embarrassed. This is another embarrassing chapter for our district. It's another embarrassing chapter for the transformation process, because when you are trying to transform a district and when you are trying to fix the problems that the HCM, that the Human Resources Commission came up with, you cannot afford missteps. You've got to handle yourself when you are the chief of human capital in charge of 20,000 employees. You need to conduct yourself with the highest integrity, as do we all. I don't want to stray too much into personnel. I know you had to make a tough call, but it could have been done swifter. Much more consistent with how we've dealt with similar situations in the past. I think that's all I have for now.
Trustee Murray.
We're, Mr. Chair, I think we're here tonight because of a leadership failure in HCM. And we've asked a bunch of questions of Mr. Singleton. Again, it wasn't his leadership failure. He was the one who brought this to our attention. Although the specific process used to do that was slow and methodical and interrupted by the Dallas Morning News. Regardless, it was you, Mr. Singleton, that and your team that found this and brought it to our light so that we could address, I should say, so the superintendent could address the leadership failure in HCM. You know, I've heard a lot of questions about what did you know and when did you know it, and why weren't we properly notified, and all that makes me think of that we're at some sort of Watergate hearing, and I vaguely remember running because we have 160,000 kids in this district. Many of them can't read, write, or do math. So I don't intend to participate in the folly of Watergate-like questions. I wasn't in your chair, so I don't know every issue that you faced. I can argue that action should have been taken differently as the investigation unfolded, but it's pretty easy to do that from the cheap seats. And our seats are pretty cheap. All we do is get yelled at all the time, and you have to do the actual work. Same thing for you, Superintendent Miles. I understand the cabinet that you put together to try to accomplish the mission of the district, and you do that under tremendous constraints. We don't really make your life all that easy in the process. But you play the hands that you're dealt, and you thought you had a phenomenal leader in the Human Capital Management Department, and while I think Trustee Cowan said it perfectly, while she got a lot of good work done, the failures of moral leadership can overshadow a lot of that good work. I can argue that you should have acted sooner. I can argue that you should have not paid the settlement statements, but I'm not here to represent populist anger with the school system. I'm here to try to figure out how we improve outcomes for 160,000 kids, working with you to do so. So I appreciate that, albeit somewhat slowly, that you made a very difficult choice to move HCM in a different direction. I know that wasn't particularly easy for you personally, but it was clearly the decision that you thought was best interest of the district, and I tend to agree. I think Trustee Cowan is right. I'm sad that we're here. I think that we have important work to do for the kids of this district, but that work starts with where we spend about 80% of our money, which is on people. And so not only the process improvements that have to be made in HCM, but also the model of leadership that has to be exhibited is important. I'm under no illusions that we don't employ human beings. I do know that we employ people who make mistakes on a daily basis. That's what human beings do. And when mistakes are egregious, then there are consequences that include termination, which is what happened here. I know that there will be more fallout from this as you continue to conduct your investigation of the other human beings that engage in the folly that we do as a fallen species. But I support the effort that you make in trying to right the ship and continue the journey of transformation. Thank you.
Trustee Mitchke.
Yeah, I've said this before that I am appalled by what we saw in those messages. I'm also very unhappy with the amount of time it took you to make the decision to terminate the individuals involved with those messages. And of course, I'm outraged by the severance. I just don't think that's the right thing to do. And I also think that what's been lacking is an apology and validation of our employees. And you know, it's ironic, we were at the schools in Vickery Meadow, Conrad, Sam Tasby, and Jack Lowe. And the purpose of that meeting was to honor the employees who had stood up for kids during the Ebola crisis. And of course we all know that that's one of the most challenging parts of our district. High poverty, lots of immigrant refugees, 30, 40 languages being spoken there. And I thought the superintendent did a very nice job in thanking the employees and honoring the employees for what they did. They were there when kids needed them. They didn't panic. And that kind of appreciation for what our employees do needs to be expressed for what our employees generally do. And to have our employees subjected to Human Capital Management Department, HR department that was acting, the leadership acting in the way it was, I just think it's totally awful. And in all the statements that have been made, what's missing, I think, has been an apology to our employees. With respect to the internal audit side, I think we have to remember that it is the Chief of Internal Audit who authorized the investigation and expanded it, and when they found more problems. And I think that you know, obviously there was a leak before the process was finished, but where I find the most troubling issues is what went on in HR. It's the substance of what went on in HR, and then the reaction to it by the administration. Thanks.
Trustee Jones?
We're a mission-driven, values-based organization. We're a school district. We have to live our values. Those aren't optional. Those are inherent to who we are and what we represent and what we stand for every single day. We have codes of moral conduct. We have ethics policies. We have lots of things to define the standards by which we expect people to conduct themselves. And that's everybody in the 20,000 personnel. It's also how we look to our kids. We expect the same of them as we do of us. Those are not two standards, it's one standard. If we're going to teach our children well, then we have to be able to be the standard and show them what it is to be better than, not just find ourselves saying, oh, it's okay. Those messages were just the tip of the iceberg. Mr. Singleton, you have said to this board that during the course of the original investigation, additional information was uncovered, and it caused you pause. There was significance, there was concern. You were trying to determine how to communicate this. You were trying to determine what to do next. It involved a chief. But you contradict yourself because you said the memo was prepared, which would have come to the board because in order to investigate a chief, that's part of protocol. You should have brought this to the board because that's the proper body. You work for us. The whole notion of independence is the fact you report to us, not to management. This is this 3-page memo is some pretty horrific stuff. If it proves the allegations as they're defined, which were defined by an investigator, not defined by just any old person, by a qualified investigator, they warranted further investigation. They demand further investigation. And yet here we are. This memo never got to the board. Thank you, Dallas Morning News, for informing us of a document that should have come to us directly. So the board really didn't even know until it was blindsided by reading it. But in the interim, and this is where I'm confused, so help me understand this. On January 7th, even though there's no investigation, to your own words, you go to the superintendent with this stack of 99 pages worth of text messages, and that's the consolidation of 400 and some odd pages, 480 some odd pages of total stuff. So this is just some of the stuff, not all of it. And you say, what exactly? Because there's no investigation, you haven't come to the board, I'm not sure what you're doing there. What was your goal? Yes, what was your goal that day, and why, in the protocol of the relationship, did he get to know about this before the board? And what authority did you have to go to him at that time, if there's no investigation?
Well, the information that was derived, these 99 pages of instant messages, were found during the process of an investigation of an HCM employee.
Who is the direct report to the chief?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And so when we were doing the investigation, we request, is pretty normal in our investigative process, to request all of the emails of not only the person that is subject, but anybody that might be connected.
Oh, I understand the process. I'm trying to understand why you took. Forgive me. My question is a different one. I understand the process. What I don't understand is why, with those 99 pages, you're talking to the superintendent if there's no investigation of the person of the chief.
As any employee is required to do, according to policy, when we find that type of information, it is to be reported to the superintendent or human capital management per policy. Do I look back now and wish maybe we had done some things differently? I do. And for that, I apologize. Will we learn from this? We will.
Forgive me. I really would like to ask some questions. because there's a lot here that doesn't add up. So you present this to the superintendent on the 7th of January.
Yes, ma'am.
What else did you do subsequent to that with respect to continuing the investigation? You've turned over part of it, but there's, in 3 pages of a memo, there's a long list of other issues that need investigation. What's being done about those?
The primary investigator, or the investigator that had started this investigation, was resigned from the district on January 5th and left that day. She was very qualified, very good. We met as an investigative staff later that day and assigned that case to another very qualified investigator. We had to move some work around. The investigator was already on a job. She had to complete a couple of things. It took us about a week to kind of get that reassigned and get her onto that. And she spent close to 3 weeks, if my memory serves, just going through all the files. So most of January has been spent going back and just trying to learn what was going on, what was in the files, and what direction to go. The investigation, in effect, was still moving forward, but we were set back because of loss of a very valued employee.
I understand that this memo was prepared before the employee had left. I assume you were well versed in the investigation, as any chief would be, of something as significant as this. This memo was authored by you to the board. So I'm still missing the part where the investigation process never came to the board, and the board was never notified, and we had to read about it, embarrassingly so, in the Dallas Morning News.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Singleton, what is the definition of independence to you in your duty to inform?
There are actually, I believe, 2 aspects of independence. First is the structural independence of our office, in that myself and our staff are independent of the administration functionally and administratively, in that the administration has no ability to fire us, hire us, stop an investigation. So there's that administrative functional separation from the administration. Second part of that is the mental aspect, the professional mental aspect of having an unbiased, objective process for which we look at any information we come upon, so that we're not unduly influenced by anyone.
And that process includes unlimited access to all personnel information, anything that is a public document or any sort of work product within this district.
That's part of the process.
And that's something you've got to have without asking for permission.
Yes, ma'am.
And that is part of the standard of investigations and in your ability to be independent. So I'm still having trouble here. When are you going to tell the board?
We had to reevaluate with a new investigator and myself to get up to speed on the investigation, to make sure that the information that was in that December 18th 3-page memo was accurate, and that it was not inflammatory, and it had good information in it. And it was something that we could support with our preliminary investigation.
Seems pretty straightforward to me. I mean, there's nothing inflammatory in here. It's all tied to policy, law, other violations, and this isn't even really getting into the substance of the instant messages, which in and of themselves were pretty heinous in terms of what it represented. So I'm just somewhat confused about how you do your job, because the board is your overseer, not the superintendent.
Yes, ma'am.
So you felt this was strong enough, and there's a lot here. In fact, hardly anything here about the text messages, although they on their own are pretty god-awful. I mean, there's one item there about the professional standards, but I'm more concerned about the other violations that may have taken place, and the fact that none of this is under investigation right now. That's concerning to me more. I mean, you have a duty to inform. You have a duty to do the investigation, and it's not being done. Thank you.
Trustee Foreman, I believe you will start the second round.
And if oh, she can go second round. I just want to get back to something, and I'll make this pretty brief. The Human Resource Department is responsible for hiring 20,000 employees for the district. And it's also the place where many of the employees go when they feel they've been wronged in the district. And clearly, there are some problems just by looking at the information that we have. My question, well, one question is, I'm still confused about the timeline, because while some trustees don't want to deal with the nitty-gritty, I think that's part of our responsibility as trustees. And for those that don't want to deal with it, I say don't deal with it. But the December 18th memo,
Yes, ma'am.
it was coming to the board for what? To ask for an investigation?
It was to inform the board that we would expand our investigation into covering a chief.
Okay. And is there an investigation of a chief now? Or is
No,
there?
No, ma'am, there's not an investigation of the chief.
Okay, so does the investigation stop here?
I think that's yet to be determined. Obviously, that chief is no longer employed here, so action has been taken to resolve that piece of it. There are other pieces of this whole situation that, as stated previously, need to be evaluated to see if we're going to do additional investigations or audits into various aspects that have come out as a result of what we've found so far.
So while I don't want to rush you, what kind of timeline are you looking at in terms of making a decision as to moving forward?
Well, I think it's happening right now. First off, we are continuing the initial investigation, and we'll make every effort to complete that as soon as possible. Second, we've already started the beginnings of an audit on some of the information we found from this material. The rest of it, we're going to have to evaluate that here over the next several weeks to determine exactly what's going to be under our scope of work.
Do you feel that you need to bring that to the board?
Typically we bring things to the board in many ways, but through our audit plan and through the audit committee, we release, the information on the investigations we're doing or reports we're doing. And so, yes.
Okay, but not just the audit committee?
No.
This is a serious situation for the district.
I agree.
And the full board needs to be made aware. You understand me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I have some questions for the superintendent, but I'll wait until we get to the second part.
Okay. Trustee Noel.
As I read the text messages, the instant messages again, I think it's very sad that this board is being very casual about it, and we want to talk about the children. You have to lead by example, and character matters. And some of the conversations that happened from August the 1st, 2013 through October the 10th, 2014, that's a year and some months, that employees, the tone at the top, they're having casual conversations. And we talk about due process. But yet we didn't give our employees due process. I agree with you, Dan. This board owes the 20,000 employees an apology. For you to go through people's lives as if it's so casual it's hurting. And they supposed to set the example for our children. You can't do great works when you are having high school conversations like this. I have a 15-year-old, and I talk to her about what she puts in writing. At 15, there are social media classes that tell employees and teenagers, don't put pictures out there, don't do this. But yet, we're paying on district time for this kind of conversation. I'm going to stress people out, talking about the Mexicans going to get us. That is just totally, and you find out about this, and the board is sitting here like, reform, transformation must happen. And then I read an email that kids can care less about text messages. Yes, they do. They care what you say about them. They care what you think about them. They talk about Pentecostal. They talk about a prayer room, which I don't see anything wrong with having a prayer room, because I'm glad there are people praying for me. They talk about cuss words in writing on public property. And we're sitting here like, oh, okay, we must move on. This is our HCM department who hire, who's supposed to terminate when they terminate people, but yet we're being casual about it. So this is very hurting for my 15-year-old daughter of one of the 160,000 in this district. I wouldn't show her to this. I wouldn't show this to her. Because these are things I tell her do not do. And some of these employees are still working for the district. Talk about fake position, hiding vacancies, talk about salaries and have them not come to our office, talk about the famous fire bullying. I mean, get ticked at freaking SF for not holding principals accountable. Talk about, I'm supposed to go get you know what. I mean, this is unacceptable behavior, and it hurts me to know we're sitting here as a board being casual about it. January the 7th, and then January the 29th is when we act. 3 weeks. 3 weeks. I agree with you, Eric. You have 2 daughters. This is not setting the standard for what we want our employees, HCM, to do. So that's my soapbox, because I work with children, and we are always telling them, don't put that on text. Don't send out an inappropriate picture. But yet we're okay, and we're casual. But to my question to Mr. Barlow, I'm trying to put this timeline together. When did you know about the instant messengers? Because as I understand, you've done some work for the internal audit.
As I recall, what my role with independent audit is, they will do a report of investigation, and they will have a lot of facts in them, and they'll cite board policy, and they'll cite law. And my role there is to look at the facts and make sure that they have cited the correct policy and the correct law applicable to those facts. And sometimes there might be something that there'll be a policy that doesn't really fit the facts, and I'll advise them, that policy really isn't implicated. But as far as this one, it was the same kind of deal. On December 3rd, I believe, Ms. Blair came over to my office to talk about, and I think the day before, Mr. Singleton had said, you're going to get a call from Mrs. Blair, there's an investigation going on, and just want you to look at the policy and the law and some of the facts so far.
Which investigation going on? The first investigation that launched in September the 3rd?
The first one, which I guess spurred this other issue out there.
Okay, let me clarify, because I understand there's only one investigation.
Right.
So Mr. Singleton called you to talk about an investigation.
He called me and said, Miss Blair is going to come over tomorrow, so he must have called me on the 2nd, and show you some information, and I want you to look at the board policy and the law and get a grasp of it, because this is something coming down the road, or could be coming down the road with higher interest people. And so I met with her. I looked at what she gave me. I don't think at that time I got 99 pages of emails. I got that later.
And what date did you get the emails? The instant whatever?
I'd have to go look at my file on that. It may have been shortly before they went public, or it may have been after. I'd have to look.
So you were made aware on December the 3rd.
Of an investigation.
You met with Vicky, with the investigator.
Yes.
I won't say any names. You met with the investigator. And at that time, you met with her to try to look at policy. And is that where the 3-page letter came from?
I think she came with presenting information to me that she had already drafted.
So on December the 15th, before the board, you met with who then?
December
Did you meet with the investigator anytime after December the 3rd?
I don't think I met with her again. I think I may have had some phone calls, though.
So you did not know about the messages?
I knew about them at some point in time, and I don't have that date handy, but I can give you that information. I just have to go look at my file.
Because what I'm trying to understand is, are you the board attorney as well?
I am the board attorney.
So
one of the board attorneys.
You're the board attorney. So at any point, did you feel the need to inform or tell Mr. Singleton that the board needs to be aware of this, because this is potential lawsuit, this just goes into a whole lot of areas. Did at any time you feel the need to inform the board?
I did not, based on what was given to me at the time. To me, it was another, and I looked at a lot of these ROIs, is what they call them. To me, I didn't know all the details. Ms. Blair just presented it to me on December 3rd, and I was looking more at the policy, whether policy was violated, whether the facts applied to the, to the law cited or the policy cited.
Looking at policy of what?
Board policy.
The policy for the investigation on September 3rd? The investigation that launched September the 3rd.
I think this included information related to that, as well as what came about, other information that came out after that.
And so, you don't know the exact date that you saw these?
I don't, but I
can
find it.
You didn't see them on September the 3rd?
On September 3rd? No.
I mean, on December the 3rd is when you met.
I don't think I did, but I can go back and check.
So, who approved, and I guess I'm trying to understand, because I thought the board attorneys can't work for basically, so is the board attorneys working for internal audit now? Because I'm trying to figure out the independence of the board attorney and this particular investigation.
My understanding is that there's approval and board policy for me to do what I've described, which is to assist internal audit in making sure that when they have these investigations, when they are going to present them as a complete investigation, that they're using the correct interpretation of board policy and the correct interpretation of law. And sometimes they aren't, and so that's where I come in. But a lot of times I look at it and I say, yeah, no, you're interpreting it correctly.
Can you tell me, Mr. Barber, which board policy approved board attorneys to work for the internal audit?
I thought I saw it in one of the audit policies.
Can you guys get that audit policy for me? Because I'm unaware that the board attorney can work for the internal audit, and so I'm trying to figure out the separations of duties, because the board attorney was aware of the information that seems to me the board should have been aware of, and then somewhere in there, this whole, I can't put I'm trying to put all this together. So, Jack, would you get that information on which
Yes, ma'am.
Policy allows for that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Any other trustees on this topic? Trustee Jones.
Yeah, I've heard a lot discussed about moral failure tonight. I've heard a lot talked about some trustees pointing back in time when this district had a very broken HR area. But I thought this period was supposed to be about moving forward, about being able to be the change, about setting a higher standard, about actually delivering on the mission at a time when we need it the most. So I am just absolutely appalled at the failures of moral leadership that we've had right now. These are public servants, and in their duty and capacity of public service, any moral failure on their part, personal or otherwise, reflects on this entire district and overshadows all the work and undermines any standard we want to set for 20,000 employees and 162,000 children. And as a board member, it's our duty to call it out. it's our duty to make sure there is accountability, and actually in this case, transparency, which didn't seem to happen, as it relates to getting to the bottom of a series of facts in evidence based on pretty solid investigators' 23 years of experience, which go beyond a bunch of text messages. And something else I'd like to sort of challenge that's been said today. If a fraud, Chief Singleton, occurs on December 19th, are you not going to investigate it until January the 5th?
We will try to always be timely.
Well, but you also try to be proactive and preemptive. I mean, part of the idea about investigations is to unearth something and that they be dealt with in real time, that they not be allowed to continue or otherwise subject a district to further liability or expose it in other areas that just complicate and impact what arguably is our bottom line. That's the duty of risk management. Our culture is defective. And everybody knows, anything about business knows that culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's a long-standing quote. It means no matter what you're doing in terms of plans and change management or whatever, if you have a defective culture, you're not going to get anything done. And that is what concerns me the most tonight. On the 29th of January, Superintendent signed a severance agreement with somebody who, in my opinion, should have been fired and was owed nothing. We're at-will employees. We hold that standard across all of our folks. We pay for performance. We talk about the standards for performance. And yet here we're rewarding bad behavior. We're rewarding people who ultimately harm a district, subject us to incredible liability, embarrass us, and yet we think it's okay to pay them money and allow them to resign, not fire them, not set a tone at the top that says this will not be tolerated and this is not what we expect of our employees. Independence is important in investigations because the truth's got to come out. And there's got to be objectivity, there's got to be a standard. We have people who are trained to investigate. And this 3-page memo, when I read it, infuriated me. Because if this is what's going on, and we're not investigating it, then we've got a problem with our internal audit area for not supporting what otherwise should be to get to the bottom of situations that put this district at grave liability. Superintendent Miles, you only saw the text messages. There's discrimination in there. There's sexism in there. There's ageism in there. I mean, there's just commentary, and this is your chief. Why did it take 2.5 weeks?
Are you finished?
That's a question.
I think he's answered that question.
Yes, I have. I could have answered that question.
Well, let me ask it a different way. Why did you need to get opinions on that? Didn't you think the words unto themselves? Coming from a chief, creating a culture in a department, setting the tone at the top?
Yes.
Was acceptable?
No, it's not acceptable. And in the end, the decision was to ask Carmen Darbo to resign. Yes, it was a difficult decision. I've said that. It's intolerable, the instant messages, and in the end, it was the right decision to ask her to resign. But taking care of making a thoughtful decision in my chair is important. I'm the one who has to go to the Human Capital Management Department the very next day and look at 150 employees and say, yes, we've relieved 2 of your top executives, and we still expect you to do the job. We still expect you to meet all the goals, because we have 160,000 kids to take care of. And they're watching closely how I behave, how we all behave, what we say about them. It's important to make a thoughtful decision. And maybe, I could have made it a week earlier. But the due process, to look into the text messages, all those things do take time, do take care. Did I get other people's opinion? Yes. I'm a decision maker. I make thousands of decisions every month. And people know that I'm not afraid of making tough decisions. But what people should also know is that sometimes a leader has to also get the opinion of others. He made, one of the things that Jay Bronowski said, a philosopher, said that the only thing a leader needs to know is that he might be wrong. That's it. And so yes, I could have made a wrong decision, and I'm going to take some care when it involves somebody's livelihood, when it involves their career, and when it involves consequences of the district of the size that I knew that it would be.
So knowing that this impacts...
So I did ask.
So knowing this impacts 20,000 employees, and it also impacts the tone at the top, how exactly did your decision support setting the tone if somebody is paid and also given releases for their behavior?
So, as a leader of the organization, I bear some responsibility for that tone, and I accept that responsibility. It's inexcusable. And so I think what we do, what I have done, what we will do going forward, it matters with regard to setting a more professional culture and a more professional tone. With regard to the settlement agreement, and that's the right term, settlement agreement, I've said before, we make decisions about settlements. It's not the first one we've had in this district, and it won't be the last. We make decisions about settlement regarding the potential risk or the cost of the district of engaging in a lawsuit. Whether or not the 2 HCM employees would have sued the district, don't know. We had some legal liability because we did not follow due process when we, the district, somehow release those IMs to the public, to the media, before we've had a chance to even settle their case or to look at their
Miles,
case. I'm trying to explain that.
With all due respect, I really...
for the settlement.
Well, the settlement itself is concerning because it happened before the full investigation was allowed to take place, and also doesn't cover all the prospective liability that this district may have as a result of 3 pages of some pretty serious allegations that cover the actions of a chief who you otherwise didn't want to get to the bottom of before you came to a financial determination of what you were going to give them. I find that to be equally problematic, if not more problematic, as it relates to the leadership decisions that were made concerning this particular matter. It is a lot of money. It is not money that was otherwise due. If there was risk to be assessed, that risk should have been assessed with all of the facts, which includes, as I said, a whole list of other things that still need to be fully investigated. And in addition to just what we know on the text messages, a number of potential situations that this district may be subjected to for people who may be able to bring claims because they were discriminated against, because they were racially slurred, because they were otherwise brought to termination on false pretenses, and on and on and on. I just feel, since we are a body that oversees this district, this was neither a prudent decision nor even one that otherwise, had you even bothered to consult with your board, which as I understand you did some board members but not everybody, and even then, we're a corporate body. It's supposed to come before the board of the whole, not be something that's done behind our backs and without respect for the body itself and what duty it owes to the public, the duty of care and on about our responsibility, which has been undermined through this process. This board was kept in the dark from day one. This board ultimately was not only blindsided, but people who have a duty to inform, that includes management and the internal auditor, both failed this board. That, to me, is equally concerning in the matter that has come before this body and something that needs to be addressed. Thank you.
One information.
Yes, ma'am.
Have we moved on to item 5?
We haven't yet. We're just about to get there. I just want to make sure that I respect everybody's opportunity to be able to add any other information. I would like to have some comments as well, and then we'll move on to number 5. So Trustee Mitchke, Trustee Cowan, or Trustee Morath, do you have anything to add to this, to the topic at hand? And Dr. Buckman, any other thing to add to still number 4? Number 5. Nope. Okay. So let me conclude this portion of the conversation, number 4, by picking back up with what I think everyone at this table, including Chief Singleton and Superintendent Miles, agree on. And that's first, that the statements we have been presented with via instant messages are not just inexcusable, reprehensible is probably the better term to use. Particularly because, outside of the fact that personal jabs are made on a consistent basis against other employees, that in and of itself is disturbing, but that it comes from the Human Capital Management Department. This district cannot stand for those types of comments to happen in the department that is charged with protecting our employees, with nurturing our employees. I'm glad that the individuals that were involved in those conversations are no longer a part of the district. I believe the right decision was made by our superintendent. I support that decision. And I would also state that any other comments that are potentially to be found in the future that follow the same tone should be handled the same way. We cannot have those types of comments and that tone, the tone within those comments, anywhere within our system. As it relates to this idea of what you are tasked with doing, Mr. Singleton, what you are tasked with doing, Superintendent Miles, and what we're tasked with doing as a board, there are clear lines that I believe we all should stick to. You are charged with being independent. You are charged with the management of our school system and personnel decisions. And we are charged with overseeing the school system and overseeing both of your departments. And that's a heavy burden for us to handle. We have to ask these types of questions when we see information like this arise. But as it relates to things along the lines of settlements, right now, we as a board do not control the issuing of any type of settlement. Trustee Mitchke has already mentioned in previous comments to the media that he would like the board to entertain a policy conversation as it relates to any severances or any settlements in the future. I think that's a conversation worthy of the board. I aim to act fast with our policy chair, Trustee Cowan, to entertain that conversation as a board. I'm not sure it's a bad idea to have the board, at the very least, be presented with information from our superintendent as it relates to any type of severance or settlement that may come about. We need to know those things, and we need to know those things before those decisions are made. So that's a conversation we will move on quickly. But it's a conversation at the moment that we have to acknowledge, though each of us may have a specific opinion on the issuing of a severance or a settlement. We cannot do anything at the moment as it relates to those things, except for say we agree or disagree or remain neutral on the matter. if we want to have that conversation in a substantive way, let's follow Trustee Mitch K's recommendation.
Point of information.
If you would please allow me the opportunity to finish my comments.
By all means.
So I'm not accepting any points of information. Thank you.
I will direct it back to the chair at the proper time.
As it relates to one of the other things I think we need to keep in mind as a board and as a district is that there are multiple components to this story. The investigation, the conduct of the investigation, who knew what, at what time, are all valid conversations to be having, and we deserve answers as a board. The public deserves answers. We also must make sure that we are ensuring that we have an internal investigation process and protocol that is respected by all individuals, by our employees, and by our board as well, and that the integrity of those investigations is upheld. Because this isn't the first time that a memo made its way to the public on an ongoing investigation and an internal review as well. And in some cases, you have people's names, employees of this district, who again, if we're going to be consistent about protecting our employees, we need to talk about all employees. If information gets out into the public and people's names are strewn out into the public, they don't have a chance to defend themselves. I can't justify not saying anything about that as a board member as well, and not making that an issue that both our internal audit and our superintendent should also be concerned with and take actions to stop. We have to protect the process and the integrity of our internal reviews and internal audits and internal investigations for many reasons. I've gotten a good feeling that there are still some questions lingering about, particularly with you, Mr. Singleton, what you knew and what you didn't know. So I just want to be very specific, man, just lay it out there. Did you ever tell anyone in either your department or in the administration to stop an internal review or an internal investigation, to hide any information about this internal review or internal investigation, or to cover up anything as it relates to this internal review or internal investigation?
No, with the exception of that when this investigation originated in September the 3rd, after a few days I said, hold off, wait a minute, we need to inform a couple of people, and because there were questions, but it was just a matter of a few days, and then we just kept it right on going. But since that time, no cover-up, no hiding any information, didn't tell anybody to stop, proceeded on throughout the investigation.
When you presented those text messages, those instant messages to Superintendent Miles, did you ever tell Superintendent Miles to stop, to hide, or to cover up any component of this potential internal investigation and current investigation on said employee?
Not at all. No.
I think those are questions that needed to be asked, and we needed to hear that directly from you. The last thing I'll say as it relates to the internal audit investigation is that I think that the public, I want to be able to go out to the public, because I get questions about this, and I want to be able to tell them that we are taking specific next steps to ensure that we are potentially rooting out any of this toxic tone or culture that may still exist within our district at large. So that way, I know I'm telling them in full faith that we're going to root this stuff out. So I want you to definitively state before we move on to the next topic what your internal audit department will do as it relates to any of this investigation or any internal review.
I've heard you tonight as a board, and yes, we will aggressively continue to look at the issues that were brought up in the 3-page December 18th memo and any other issues that may come out of this investigation, and we will pursue those as we can aggressively. we've learned a lot from this, and it's opened our eyes to other areas. And so other areas that have issues, you know, we will do the proper professional work, do it timely, and communicate properly. We will protect the district employees from disclosure. We're looking at our own protocols right now, so we can protect that information. But we will continue to be a professional level audit and investigative work in this district.
The only additional comment that I'll add to close those questions is that this board must continue to remain informed as this internal investigation process continues. Follow the proper protocol, follow your internal checks and protocol that you've established as our chief internal auditor.
Yes, sir.
Point of information.
I was not accepting any point of information.
I'm addressing it to the chair of the body, not to you personally.
And I am answering your point of information. We're moving on to our the next agenda item.
I'm sorry, can you rule on that, please? I'm addressing the chair. I'm trying to make a point of information. It's related to the item before us, and he's...
I just want to make it clear, I can't rule on any of the items at all with regards to that. If you're asking whether or not he can reject your point of information, is that your question?
I find a point of information is an entitlement that everybody is allowed to make.
Which is a question.
To the body, it is a question. Unless I'm wrong about this.
Please state your question to the body.
My question has to do with the 3-page memo. The party, the chief, is that person still going to be investigated? Because that's the 3-page memo. It belongs to the chief. And that was the part that was supposed to come to the board and be approved. So what's the status of this?
We want to check the legal status of where we can go with the investigation of the chief, since the chief is no longer an employee of the district. As soon as we get that answer, then we'll react to that.
So in essence, if I understand you correctly, for 2 months, or period that I guess it was October when you first uncovered some of the pieces, December when you could put together this 3-page memo to sort of integrate not just the piece about the text messages, but also a whole list of other pretty substantive concerning issues with that person. We've now squandered everything as far as being able to investigate. So in other words, that stops because somebody's no longer here?
To answer your question, I don't know what the results would have been if this had never been disclosed and the normal process had gone forward. I suspect you would have gotten and received the same results. At this point, it seems to me that the thing's been answered.
Actually, nothing's been answered, but
okay,
there's still 3 pages of issues that have never been addressed and should have, that are critical to this district. Thank you.
We are now on to our next item, discussion of Superintendent of Schools' response regarding the Human Capital Management Department. Superintendent Miles.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Obviously, as has been discussed, these are pretty serious matters, and we do want to root out any of that sort of unprofessional behavior and egregious behavior if it is rooted in the system. And so I've taken several steps to try to determine the extent. So we've already started, I asked Jack Elrod in the legal department to hire independent counselors to look at all of the text messages and sample some of the emails of all the directors and higher, directors, EDs, assistant supes, cabinet, going back at least a year, and to flag any thing that might be concerning from a legal standpoint a policy standpoint or a moral and ethical standpoint. I've also asked for TASB, and they've agreed, to conduct a thorough review of HCM processes. And that means looking at the STAR recommendations, looking at the leadership team, looking at the other processes, not just to see if there are problems, but also to see if there is progress. Keep in mind, one of the things that I've also tried to do is tried to hold the Human Capital Management Department together. As you can suspect, they feel pretty put upon, and we have to be very careful not to paint all of them with the same brush. There's a lot of good people working really hard. They have a job to do. They're stepping up and getting the job done. So part of the response to this incident is to make sure that we continue to value those employees who are doing a good job, while we are looking at instant messages and will conduct a proper investigation at the time that we find that we need to, while we are looking at all of the processes and seeing if there's a more systemic issue. Finally, two other things. One of the things that I own squarely is to make sure that professional development around professionalism and ethics continues to is placed at high priority, and we're going to do that. We've already started to look at how we can do more training. We've already started to look at new teacher orientation and things like that we can do immediately. But a more comprehensive training of our central office staff is important to us. We're also getting feedback in surveys of all the departments, not just HCM, and we'll be doing some training over the summer and then throughout the year on professionalism, professional culture, and so we're going to up our level there as well. And then finally, when we had already started this process, part of the evaluation of employees right now is the 3R. It's not as rigorous. It's not as focused on professional culture as it probably should be. And so we're going to redesign our evaluation system, our 3R process for central office staff. Those are some of the things that we're doing to try to reinstill confidence in our HCM, but also our other central office departments and our leadership team.
Trustees, any comments? Trustee Foreman?
Superintendent Miles, I am extremely disappointed that there was a decision to pay 2 at-will employees a severance package. I've had the opportunity to sit on some of our employee hearings, and I've heard people say, you're at will, and we can let you go for any reason. These 2 particular employees should have been fired with no money, no taxpayer money. Now I have a couple of questions, maybe 3. You received the information from the audit department on January the 7th?
Yes, I believe that was the date.
Okay. And at that time you were assessing what you would do. Is that what I heard you say?
Yes, I was looking at all of the implications and reading the messages and assessing.
And to my surprise, maybe not some other trustees, on January the 27th, the story broke in the newspaper. January the 27th. Around that time?
I believe that was around that time. Sure.
Around that time. And so you took action on January the 29th.
I took action on that Wednesday when I called Carmen Darville in and said she was going to be, that I was asking for a resignation.
So that was around January the 29th, after the story broke.
I think it was on, I think Wednesday was 27th.
Whichever. after the story broke, correct?
Yeah, I was already making my decision despite the story.
Had you contemplated coming to the board and letting the board know about what had taken place?
No, not before making a decision about what I would do with Carmen Darby.
And so when you made your decision, which board members did you talk to?
I talked to, let's see, trying to remember again, Dan, Eric, Mike, Lou, about the settlement agreement.
And who else did you speak with?
I spoke with Trustee Solis, sorry I called you all by first names, I apologize, and Trustee Bingham, just about the fact that I would ask Ms. Darville for her resignation.
So you didn't speak with Trustee Nuttall, Trustee Jones, nor myself?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Is this a body corporate?
Yes, it is.
Do you believe all board members should have been talked to?
Yes, on the resignation. I'm trying to remember if the board members were called about the resignation. I'm not remembering.
I have some severe concerns about where we stand at this time in regards to if there is an investigation taking place. I hear a lot of different stories about what's going to transpire after this meeting. And there needs to be, the public needs to know, Trustee Solis, what we're going to do. While we can make pretty statements about what is and what's not, it only matters what you do.
Agreed.
It only matters what you do. And we've got to do better as a board. We are the stewards of the public's money, not the superintendent. And we need to fix it.
Trustees, any other questions or comments? Trustee Jones.
Is there an organizational chart that's been put out on the Human Capital Management Department now that we've lost two of the top members?
Yes.
And can that be produced, because it's been asked for the past 2 weeks and it hasn't seemed to make its way to the light of day? So I would hope that that should be immediately put out there. Who is in charge of Human Capital Management right now, and what is their roles, absent having a chief?
Right now, there are two executive directors. I informed the board tonight that we will have an interim starting tomorrow. And so those three will be leading Human Capital Management until we find a permanent chief of Human Capital Management.
So as of January 29th, when Ms. Darville officially tendered her resignation that you approved, who was actually the leader of Human Capital Management? Who had the legal authority and was acting as the chief, whether de facto or in title?
So we work quickly to redefine roles. There's two executive directors in Human Capital Management who are taking on most of the responsibilities. But we shifted, for example, finance and purchasing, anything that have to do with decision making regarding finance and purchasing, to Jim Terry's shop. We also asked Deputy Chief of Staff Justin Coppage to actually do a little bit of the Chief of Staff role and do some coordination. If Human Capital Management had to intervene with other departments or intersect with other departments, he would help do that. Until we got an interim chief of Human Capital Management. We were working pretty quickly. I think you can see that we did, to get an interim chief in.
And the two executive directors, who essentially are the chiefs of the department at this stage?
Yes, ma'am. The
Who
two
are they?
leads, the two executive directors are Tanya Grayson Sadler and Meredith Hudson.
And one of those two is the subject of an investigation still?
That's correct.
The investigation that we were originally talking about, as it related to the chief?
That's correct.
Okay. So how does this improve our situation going forward? Why is this leadership structure an improvement?
Well, in the short term, it wasn't an improvement. We lost two persons from human capital management under these circumstances, so the leadership there, was not an improvement. We are going to move forward to try to find good leadership in the interim, and we think we've found somebody in Carrie Chapman. And then we have posted, and we already have applications coming in for Chief of Human Capital Management. We also are looking to replace one of the ED, or to have the ED position that's vacant filled. So yeah, we're moving quickly to try to grow our leadership there in human capital management. It's not a great situation right now.
Did you have, or is there a document, I've been trying to find it, was there any kind of succession plan that had been laid out so that in the event of these types of situations, whether because of accident or tragedy or something like we've faced, we would know how to have a smooth transition and not have this kind of chaos in losing a top person or a chief?
We could probably do a better job with succession planning. Right now we rely on very much on the org chart and the chain of decision making in each of the departments. But we've already had some, at least a few of us have had some discussions about having a more precise succession plan for each of the departments.
But you didn't have one in place.
Like I said, we have a chain of decision making in human capital management, and that's what we're following right now.
And who's in charge of the PSO, or the area where we do investigations and these other areas that are important to this district, like child abuse cases, background checks? Who's the legal authority, or who's the person that is the head of that area?
The person who oversees the PSO is Tanya Grayson Sadler.
And the wisdom of that is what?
That is her job. That has been her job.
I meant the wisdom of somebody under investigation being the standard for investigations.
I'm not sure.
Mr. Jones. Jones.
Yeah.
Sorry. You want to build a better culture. You talked about making sure that we have accountability, that we have transparency, and that we have people who are the standard and set the tone at the top. But I'm not seeing where in the current organization, post the loss of Ms. Darville and Mr. Munoz, that that exists. Even with Ms. Chapman coming in, and I'm assuming based on her long history in HR and with school districts and her experience, and also her more senior age, that we've got somebody with experience, but that's an interim, not somebody who's there to lead after such a tragedy that we've experienced in leadership. So I'd like to see, or it needs to be, a lot more evident in terms of a plan and not just a lot of talk about what are the specific steps, what are the specific areas that will be looked at, and how you report that to this board is no less important. So that should be part of the expectation going forward that I have yet to see, and we're already almost 2 weeks, more than 2 weeks after situation. That also is something that we expect of our leadership, our CEO. Thank you.
Trustee Nettle?
Superintendent Miles, I'm trying to, Carmen Darville, she wrote a letter of apology on January 27th. So I'm trying to put a timeline together. So January the 7th is when you found out about the text messages, instant messages. January the 29th is when we accepted her letter of resignation. But on January 27th is when, I guess, January the 26th is when the news media broke the story. Then on January 27th is when she apologized for error in judgment. And so on the 29th is when you decided to accept her resignation. So in there, she apologized and said she's going to do better and her team is going to move forward. And mistakenly thought the communication was private. So, can you explain that to me?
Yes, Wednesday I asked Ms. Darville for her resignation. Thursday, I believe, our lawyers were working with her and Munoz to write the settlement agreement. And I think they were signed, they were completed that evening. The next day is Friday. I went to Human Capital Management retreat and talked to them about those decisions.
So we accepted her apology because is that one of her actions, which she apologized. So we accepted that.
We didn't accept her apology. She made that statement.
Okay, I hope to regain by my words and actions going forward the trust of my colleagues, the district, and the community. So at this time, you hadn't offered her, accepted her resignation.
I think that letter was written on Tuesday during the day, or
it was
and Wednesday is when I asked for her resignation.
The 27th is when the letter was written and she apologized. So I'm just trying to
and
put
maybe
the
when it
timeline
was
together.
published. I think it was written the day before it was published.
And so, what changed your decision? Help me process on, after she apologized, why did you ask her, what was the reason? Because she apologized enough for her.
Well, those two dots don't need to be so closely connected. She made her letter of apology. I asked for her letter of resignation.
Okay, when she made her letter of apology. The other question on the settlement agreement, we gave her how many months of payments? How many months?
The settlement agreement was for 5 months, and then you back out the number of accrued leave days she has.
And how many days?
I believe, and we can get you the specific numbers, I believe that was 19 work days.
So we backed out of the 5 months, 19 work days.
That's correct, as I understand.
So that's
the settlement.
days that she earned. Correct.
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
5 months. And the other person, we gave them 2.5 months.
I believe the settlement agreement was for 2 months, and you back out again the days of leave.
So the employees, are we giving other employees that we fired and terminated, are we giving them the option to use their days?
I think the settlement agreements are very similarly constructed, if I'm not mistaken, right, Jack?
They're standard.
So we're giving other employees that option to use their days?
They lose their days.
They lose their days?
Yes.
But these
But it's
two employees
included.
have the option to
No, it's
use their
included.
days?
No, they
It's
also
included
lose.
in it.
You said what now?
It's included in it.
Meaning they lose those days. It's included in the time frame.
Okay, in the amount of the settlement agreements. Okay.
Trustee Bingham?
When it comes to settlements, I don't think anybody really likes to give a settlement because I know everyone sitting around this table can think of a lot of different ways that money could be better spent. But unfortunately, it's a reality not only in the business world but in education. We have people that it is cheaper, and you hate to look at the cold hard facts or cold hard money, but a lot of times it is cheaper to do a settlement than it is for litigation, and we do that all the time. And like I said, I don't like it, but I do think it is a reality. And then oftentimes we are in the long run saving the taxpayers a lot more money because we do settlements rather than to do litigation. So as it is now, the superintendent does have that right to do those. If the policy changes, then we certainly examine it in a different way. But I find it interesting that all of a sudden we're very concerned about settlements now, and over the past several years we've done settlements throughout that time, and where's the outrage on those? That's it.
Any other comments? Mr. Mitchell?
Yeah, I've covered most of this in the prior discussion item, but I do want to come back to the issue of morale and the need for an apology. I think it's important to put yourself in the position of an employee who reads these messages, and I think that, you know, to date we haven't had from the superintendent an apology that recognizes how awful these messages are and how poisonous it is to the culture. And so I would suggest that you reread these messages this week and think about a way to express that regret to our workforce. Thank you.
Trustee Mitchke, I regret not having expressed my regret over the messages. I have said that they were egregious, and that I think my actions show that they were, that I consider them pretty egregious. But I will take this opportunity because I think you're right. I've talked to the staff about it, but I haven't apologized for what the instant messages have done to distract us from the main mission. They have raised a lot of questions about how people may have been treated. And so I know, you know, when people read those, it strikes at your, strikes at your core. It has me, and so I suspect for any employee reading them, it strikes at their core, and they probably feel a lot of different emotions, whether it's anger or just regret or just just dismay. It really is disheartening. And so I apologize that those messages have been written. I apologize that we had a couple leaders who wrote those things and wasn't, didn't have the same sort of professional treatment that we would expect of our leaders. I apologize to our close staff too, not just our teachers and schools. And I apologize to this board. It's not a good thing, and it's not. I think Trustee Cowan said it too. All the good work that's going on, it really detracts from that, and it leaves a bad taste in your mouth, especially about the success that human capital management has had. So I, Superintendent, apologize to this board, to the staff, to our teachers, and to the community, which holds us, expects us to have higher standards than what was displayed.
Trustee Blackburn.
I think we need to have some serious changes in HCM. I know we've talked about the idea that the employees in HCM are feeling like we're talking about them. I don't see it that way, and I don't think they feel that way. I think they may be embarrassed about having the attention brought to their department, but I think, if nothing else, it has exposed what we've been hearing about. The media has exposed what people in HCM have been living with. And that's why I think we need to have some serious changes in HCM. And that's why I think we need to have a review of HCM, not just from our own staff, but from external staff. It's good that TASP is going to come in. TASP is primarily going to look at the operations of the organization, of the department. But at some point, we're going to have to get a feel for the organizational health of the HCM. At some point, we're going to have to rise above the schools and get a climate survey and look at the HCM department and do a climate survey. Look at the operations department and do a survey. The school and the business and finance department, the IT department. We need to get a sense of the climate and the culture in all of our central office positions. We received an article about tone at the top. We have gotten a new evaluation system for the teachers, for the principals, at the campus level. And now we're rising up to the executive directors and the assistant superintendents are going to get an evaluation system. But at the central office level, trustees, if you have not seen the 3R evaluation, the first part of that is dealing with things like trustworthiness, character. So it's basically character counts. That's the start of that evaluation system, talking about your character. And I'll have you know, trustees, that every single chief got glowing remarks on their last evaluations, including on their character. Superintendent Miles, Internal Auditor Singleton, we need to have an external review of our HCM department, starting with the HCM, and then I think going further to the other major departments. Because as I said earlier, I think we need to dig deeper to get to the root. Further, I think we need to continue our investigation of HCM from an internal audit department. I don't think just because 2 employees are gone that the cancer is gone. I think it's still there. If you guys talk to the employees confidentially so that they have no fear of losing their jobs, I think you will find more that's on their mind. Superintendent Miles, I appreciate you apologizing at this time. But for right now, we need to see more action. We need to see a department that is rising above fear, rising above this atmosphere of fear. We need to dig deep. Thank you.
Trustee Cowan?
One last word, just as we go down this road and we talk about tone at the top, let's remember that we are at the top and how we conduct ourselves as a board with the high-level administrators displays how we should all be behaving. It was mentioned that if some of us knew about the severances and the resignations, some didn't. I think that speaks to the level of trust that exists in this room. And that is something that needs to be worked on. And I should say also that even though we knew about the severances, it doesn't mean we agreed with them. And I look forward to having that conversation, that policy discussion at the board table. Because it does need to be discussed and it does need to be reviewed. So, as we talk about tone and behavior and integrity, let's review ourselves every now and then too. Thank you.
Okay, Trustee Morat. Any comments?
Sit on my stuff before.
Okay.
We do round 2.
Trustee Dunn?
Couple of comments. First, Superintendent, we're one board. Everybody is an equal among equals. It's very disconcerting to learn that you treat some greater than others. And this board has an officer structure which equally must be respected and at times is not. So I just want to remind all of us that we're a corporate body and we're supposed to act as a body, but it's hard to do so when certain people are treated differently. The last 2 weeks, I have spent an enormous amount of time with you out in the community positively trying to sell this district to the families that entrust us with their children every day. We held 2 really strong town hall meetings that truly were there to make sure that the community understood what this district is doing that is working. But it is incredibly infuriating to be a trustee sitting at a board table on a night like tonight, looking at the failures of leadership that you hired, leadership that you were supposed to be supervising, and leadership that clearly for more than a year, at least as far as the text messages are concerned, was conducting themselves in a context that completely undermines everything we stand for. There are a number of issues that were raised in the memo that have to do with retaliation, termination, unethical conduct, inappropriate use not just of the electronic media, but also conflicts of interest, nepotism, and on and on. Falsifying records, false statements, failure to obtain background checks, these are not simple items. When you're the chief of human capital management, and this is a derivative issue to a person being investigated who is part of some of these same decisions. Last week, 2 people were fired, as I understood it. Another thing I get to read in the Dallas Morning News. Who actually fired those 2 individuals?
We're not going to get into personnel matters.
Do we know who the chief was? I mean, can we just ask a simple question?
Ask your question that I've said before he responded. Proceed with your question.
Who signed off on it?
I asked for their resignations. I terminated them.
Okay. I think I agree with Trustee Blackburn that the matters of human capital management run deep, that the tentacles are more than just text messages and always have been, but that tone at the top is endemic of a culture and a way of doing business that is not only inappropriate, it is possibly in violation of policy, it's in violation of law, and it's in violation of ethical standards that we're supposed to here as a board uphold. I would ask for an independent investigation from somebody on the outside who knows how to look into these matters with some degree of understanding about the implications of risk management, of liability, and all of the related pieces that have to be there to ensure that we as a district can feel that our human capital management department is not a runaway train and is not more defective than it was in years past. This goes beyond the failures of moral leadership. This also goes to qualified management. And right now, I do not have, after tonight, any more comfort than when I came in here. In fact, I've got more anxiety as it relates to our ability to get to the bottom of what still remains a series of issues that need to be resolved. I would even ask that we look outside to somebody like a Kroll, who recently just did an independent investigation for the UT system, to look at the standards and make sure that they're in alignment, to look at these matters that still remain open that have to do with leadership conduct and also the performance inside of a department that holds 20,000 employees' lives in their hands, literally. We cannot as a district move forward until we know for certain that the department is operating to the highest standard, that the conduct of all employees not only represents and reflects the highest standards of human capital management, or in this case, the HR world, that our organization is free of all of these things that got us to this point. And I believe we need to do that immediately. Thank you.
Trustee Neville?
I'm glad that Trustee Cowan brought up how tone at the top and high-level administrators with the board. They need to also look at conducting themselves with board members as well. And tone at the top comes with effective communication. And I've pulled every email for the last 2 years that I've written to the board president, you, Trustee Cowan, you were president, about effective communication and the lack of that this board has received. Requesting the same respect, fairness, options, and opportunities to all districts, that we are a corporate body, a board. Dr. Blackburn said the cancer is still there, and I agree with him that the cancer is still there. Because as I review a year of communications to you, Superintendent Miles, requesting that fairness on every incident that have happened in District 9, we're still at this place today. And so tone at the top is very important, but this board only acts together, but we work independently. There are some things that are afforded to other board members, that's not to one. And we can look at our Title I budget, our Title II budget, and look where the money's being allocated to. We can look at our schools, 17 low-performing schools, and Trustee Blackburn, 10 in Trustee Foreman, and 5 in my district. We can look at a legal, fair, and consistent system. You're right, Trustee Blackburn. We've been hearing this for a while. Now it's in black and white in paper. So I welcome an outside entity coming in to look at our systems and how we treat our employees. Because as Trustee Morale stated, 80% is people. So people, they matter. As that saying that says Black Lives Matter, our people at DISD that work with our children every day at the ground game matter. We want our teachers to enjoy coming to work at DISD, to work with our children when we have 26 in the classroom. So I think this board needs to soul search and look at how we have created this problem and how we communicate and allow our one employee to communicate to us. We're at fault here. We, the board, has created this cancer of all of these investigations. We started with Trustee Jones' investigation. Now it's me. Who's next at this board level? So this administration has no respect for the board and our position as an elected official. Just give the information. And every email I conclude with, how you do anything is how you do everything, by Dr. Martin Luther King. And I say, look, going forward, what communication protocol would this administration use when it determined the future of District 9 schools? It's email after email after email after email, requesting a fair, legal, and consistent system for our children. And so now we're here with the investigation, and now we're going to talk about the investigation of Silence the Voice, trying to shut down trustees. So
we're not there. We're not there just yet.
No, we're not there yet, but we're getting there.
Any other questions on item number 5?
I had a legal question.
On item number 5?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
The board receives specific notices from the administration concerning reports that have to get made to the TEA. Certain notices of employee sanctions, things like this. It's a requirement that we are noticed for the state. We used to receive that signed off by a chief. Now we receive it Human Capital Management Department. Is that even a legal entity, or can a department sign something when there's no person who's directly named and responsible?
Well, I can take a look at that specifically, but I know we have various signing authority throughout the district. I sign documents, Dr. Smisko signs documents.
Right, and you put your names. I mean, your names are there with your signature, attesting that it was you who basically confers, that authority. What I'm trying to figure out here is I get a document that, is a notice to the state, and it's signed Human Capital Management Department, no human.
Well, let me take a look at that.
Thank you.
Okay. Before we move on to number 6, final conversation, I just want to make sure that I'm clear again on next steps for this administration regarding human capital management. Just very bullet point. What are the next steps that you're taking this?
We're gonna follow through on the investigation we've already started about instant messages and sampling emails.
And that's you leading that investigation, or an external?
We are. Our legal department is getting an external counselor, lawyer,
Okay.
to do that. TASB will do a full audit of the human capital management, focused on the STAR Commission, but also leadership. We're doing professional training, evaluating, changing the 3R system. Those are the 4 main bullet points.
Okay. Trustees, we are now on to item 6, discussion of the completed investigation report regarding allegations of board policy violations by a trustee, including complaints alleged by district employees against a trustee, and keeping with the spirit of our previous conversations, Dr. Blackburn will lead this conversation.
Thank you. Trustees, I'm going to ask you one last time if there is any one of you that feel like this report should not be disclosed to the public tonight. Speak now. Yes, sir.
I'm just wondering if we can disclose all the investigative material as well.
I'm just talking about the report. Everything that's attached to the report.
That's all we've got.
That's all we got.
So we don't want to disclose the related investigative material?
There is no.
They only have this one report.
That's related.
There's nothing related to this report.
Okay, he just.
Speak now. Then we have copies that we will issue out to the public tonight as we leave. For right now, trustees, we have read the report, we have received the report and read the report. Do we have any comments about the report itself? And we can start with Trustee Foreman.
Thank you, Trustee Blackburn. For one, I was very disappointed that this district went forward with an investigation on a trustee without the board knowing that she was going to be investigated. That was disheartening to me, because that simply means that using that same framework, any trustee could find themselves in this situation. And that was unfortunate. But it is fortunate, and I'm happy, that there is some vindication for this trustee. What was very disappointing to me is that it was very easy for this district to release the allegations against the trustee. Didn't have any problems with that. But we talk about protecting people. We talk about protecting people. Did we do that with the trustee? No, we didn't. We did not. And I am so happy that this board has made the decision that the public should have this information, because the public paid for it. The public paid for it. And as the public begins to see the report, 3 allegations. 2 people determined I wasn't really filing a complaint. The 3rd person, nothing substantiated. That's an unfortunate situation, and we as a board need to look at the policy to make sure that this kind of situation does not happen in the future. We need to do better, board. I came here with a good reputation. I plan to leave here with one. And this I will not tolerate as a board member. I will not tolerate mistreating a board member in this manner.
Thank you. Trustee Michigan?
I'm going to pass for the moment right now.
Thank you. Trustee Jones?
Pass for a moment.
Thank you. Trustee Solis?
Thank you, Dr. Blackburn. As it relates to the report, I believe we're all in agreement that anytime you have an opportunity to vindicate an individual in which allegations that are very serious allegations go unsubstantiated or don't have enough evidence within the scope of the investigation to conclude on, you should do that. I do believe this is worthy as well of a policy conversation. How do we, as best as we can, from a board's perspective, ensure that everyone is treated in a fair and equitable fashion? That there are processes that are transparent and clear as it relates to any investigation. So that's another policy conversation I think we not only should be having, but I aim with our agendas to have. I would also say that the same tone of the argument just used, I would only ask that we reflect on the previous arguments that we've had about administrators and information that makes its way out into the public before they have an opportunity to defend themselves. Whether or not at the end of the day those individuals are found, quote unquote, to be guilty of any information in the eyes of the administration or our investigative unit, those administrators deserve a vindication of their name if they are not found to be guilty or information becomes unsubstantiated. I can think of a handful of administrators just in the past 3 years whose names have been out in the public. Later we find out there have not been laws broken. So we need to have that conversation for everyone, board members and administrators as well.
Thank you. Trustee Bingham?
Yeah, I think short of wearing body cams, sometimes it's difficult to substantiate a he said, she said situation. I think what's unfortunate is that we don't have a clear-cut policy, and I know Trustee Cowan, who is the policy chair, will be working on this. But we do need to have a clear-cut policy plan that addresses if there's a complaint or an allegation made against a trustee, but then also I think the employees also have to have an avenue in which they have a right to voice a concern. If a trustee is not doing what they need to be doing, it's a two-way street. I'm not sure what the answer is on this, but I hope that through our policy, Eric, that we can come up with something that's fair for everybody.
Thank you. Trustee Nuttall?
Here we go.
Trustee Cowan? Trustee Murat? Are you going to come back around for the second go-round, the final go-round?
Oh, the one round. We're still on round one.
Well, now, you skipped your round.
No, we
So,
didn't.
Let's go.
We didn't skip it.
Trustee Foreman?
No.
Trustee Foreman?
She's already spoken.
Trustee Foreman?
Point of order, Mr. Chair. We're still on round one. There are several trustees who did not give up their right. They just said they wanted to not be in that order.
Trustee Jones, I'm going back around. Trustee Foreman?
Is this point of information, is this her first or second time she's speaking?
This would be her second time.
And there are board members who have not spoken yet, who I believe deserve the right to a first round before you go on to the second round.
You will have your time to speak for the first time. Trustee Foreman?
Trustee Blackburn? You know, it's interesting to me as the conversation comes up about what happened to a fellow trustee. What I'm hearing is what happens to the employees. The employees have recourses, but the trustees, this trustee did not. And we always want to switch the subject instead of facing the issue that is before us. The issue before us dealing with this investigation of a trustee is not the issue of dealing with the employees. We just got through dealing with that. Now we're dealing with the trustee. And so it would be really nice if we could stay focused, stay on point, and understand what we're talking about here. And it's the investigation of a trustee that was done, in my mind, unfairly.
Thank you. Trustee Mr.
I'm wondering if Jack or Sonia or Ben are prepared to recommend any policy changes that relate to investigations of trustees. It seemed that it was discussed in this memo that if there's an allegation made, it must automatically be investigated if you assume that the claim on its face is true. So I'm wondering, in other words, if you assume the allegations are true, would that constitute a violation of policy or equal rights? Then the claim must be investigated. I think that's the way it reads. Is there some guidance you can give us on that?
Well, obviously this is an unusual situation, and I didn't draft that policy. That policy has been in effect, and the purpose of it is to give employees an avenue if they feel like they are being harassed or discriminated against. I think that there is some wisdom in taking allegations at face value, because our experience has been that we get a lot of people who are complaining, who they may be complaining against their boss, they may be complaining against a supervisor, and once they start thinking about what could happen to them, then a lot of them have said don't investigate. But if we have an allegation of discrimination or harassment, it needs to be looked into. I don't know that this is the proper avenue for trustees, if the trustees are the ones being complained against. That's a matter for you all to decide. There's obviously some concern there, and that is probably something you should look at.
And yeah, my understanding is that generally the D policies that we have deal with employees and not with trustees, and that if we are going to have any sorts of investigations against trustees, they need to be dealt with through a different policy or board operating procedures.
Well, again, that's your call. This particular policy makes no exception for who the person that's being complained about. We have investigated non-employees a number of times, parents or people that were bothering or harassing employees. So it just makes no exception. It's just the focus is entirely on the person who's making the complaint.
Okay. Well, Mr. President, Trustee Cowan, I think this is probably a policy that we at least want to discuss in the future and see how we think it ought to work when the trustee's involved. Thanks.
Thank you. Trustee Jones?
Thank you. Well, it's just a lot of conversation tonight about fairness, equity, trust, respect, reputational risk. Go down the list. There's got to be only one standard. In any organization, in any body, there's got to be one standard. And it applies to everybody as the same. Not to some, under certain conditions more than others. There's one standard. Tonight I've seen nothing but double standards in so many different areas, it makes my head spin. This report cost the taxpayers, we were told up front, an estimate of about $30,000, maybe more. For what exactly, I'm not sure. I understand the need for the independent review. I understand the need for the external oversight of that review as an independent entity doing an investigation of a highly sensitive matter of somebody who has a reputation as well, that they're entitled to also protect and not be put under circumstances that aren't fair. As I read this report, our fellow trustee was cleared of wrongdoing. It was an independent assessment. The original allegations that were made were not substantiated, and in one case, if you read it closely, it almost looks like people were being asked to write them, which concerns me more. Tone at the top starts with the team of 10. And there cannot be differences in relationships, differences in treatment. Everybody on this body is an equal among equal. And the respect, the trust has to be there. It's not something that's negotiated for or bargained for or otherwise allocated to people who you like better than others. Our job as a body is to make sure we do effective oversight, that we do get to the bottom of some very difficult issues, that we do set the proper standards, and that we do make sure that the planning we do is carried out and executed by management. I am troubled by tonight on so many levels. I'm sitting here fighting for my life, many of you know, dealing with cancer. But I'll tell you, it's nothing compared to some of the cancer I've seen in the way things operate around here. And I believe that word was used by the very trustee who was the subject of this situation. It is unacceptable that we don't have complete transparency and accountability of all parties. And it starts with the way we all individually build those relationships, manage those relationships, and support those relationships. We are a corporate body, we have a duty, and as a body we need to be respected for the work that we do. Yes, we have to ask tough questions. At times, we're doing so because the public demands it of us, not for anybody's personal reasons. I'm having a really bad case of deja vu tonight. It makes me really sick. 2 years ago, not quite, there was an investigation that started with a chief for which an EEOC claim required that it be independently investigated on the outside. And during the course of that investigation, information came to light about trustees being disparaged behind their backs that were substantiated in an independent outside report. I thought we were beyond that. I thought that such disparagement or attacks or personal issues, going after people in such negative ways, spreading lies or whatever the bottom line is, would stop. Yes, we're public officials. Yes, we're accountable to the public. Every public servant is accountable to the public. We are all collectively accountable. But in today's world, why anybody would serve on a public body is beyond me, with the reputational risk that they have to put up with, things that otherwise good people who are trying to do good and trying to give up their time, because this is indeed a volunteer body, a body that doesn't get paid for its work, for which I personally last year spent 1,500 hours doing, has to go through things like this. That's unacceptable too. We're here to do the work. We're here to focus on the children. We're here to actually make sure that that is done at the highest of standards, as we've talked about tonight. And that's the expectation. But that's also what all of us should stand for. And all of us hold each other accountable for. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Solis?
Nope, thank you.
Okay. Trustee Bingham?
Nope.
Trustee Nuttall?
Yes. An attempt to undermine me as a trustee and harm me professionally. Let me be very clear with the public. After that investigation under Trustee Jones a year and a half ago, and after several other things that happened in this district, I always had a rules of engagement. And my rules of engagement is I never meet with this administrative staff by myself, nor do I talk on the telephone with them without witnesses. I go through board service and they connect me, and they're always there to listen to my conversations. So to be very clear, and I put everything in writing. I have over 2 years of emails that I send to staff, CCing the board president, Mike, Superintendent Miles, and all the necessary people. So to my dismay, this was a public conversation with Tanya Grayson Sattler in the back room, the first time and the last time that I spoke with her, after I realized the ultimate disrespect of a trustee. Yes, I asked the tough questions and I pressed for information. And to recap that conversation that afternoon, it was about treating people fairly. As Dr. Blackburn stated, is that we've been hearing about all of this unfair treatment of our employees. And the athletic press conference had just happened. So I asked her about it. And it said in the report, treating people disrespectful, treating people right, just treating people right, grow people or let them go. It says Trustee Nuttall said that Ms. Grayson got real snappy. And what I did, I got snappy back with her on that. It also says that with Officer Freddie Jackson, it talks about he didn't even submit a claim because Freddie is my friend. So what happened to me at Billy Earl Day when I was invited to seek information and dealing with other trustees, they get invited all the time. One of the trustees here was at one of my schools challenging the staff. We're not going to go down that road. But I'm just saying a fair, legal, consistent system. And in that, after that incident happened at Billy Earl Day, I was hurt that officers would put their hands on me. I have 2 daughters. That's never happened to me. And let's be clear about that incident, what triggered this investigation. Said I went to Freddie Jackson and I said, we're friends. Why did you not stop or take the superintendent? And he told me the reason why. So yes, we had a conversation because I was hurt because he's my friend. And he states that in there, that he's my friend. So that's why we had that conversation. And the rest of it, and I'm happy that we're releasing this report to the public. And I'll be glad to talk about any of the incidents. To be clear, there is a process for trustees to go through when there's a problem with the trustees and our board operating procedure. But this to me, as in my statement, I put a 7-page statement. And yes, I hired an attorney. The the allegations came to Superintendent Miles. He took it to an attorney, and an attorney took it to another attorney. And you're going to sit and say all kind of things about me to hurt me as a trustee and professionally And as a mother, a wife, been married 18 years, so you have disagreements with people, but you work through them. So I hired an attorney as my role as trustee, the district, to defend me in these allegations, to defend me in this. My attorney did not have the opportunity to interview any of the people. They wouldn't allow her to. So this is strictly Mr. Coggins' report of just his interview. And so I am happy this report is public. We can put this to rest. And as I said in my 7-page statement, the investigation has been a most regrettable effort to silence my voice, to suppress my criticism of district officials, and to misdirect focus away from the issues that impact the education of our children. If I can't run, I will continue to walk for the students of District 9. And if all the emails you can see that I've just asked for a fair, legal, and consistent system to give us. I mean, other trustees get privileges that we don't get. Once again, look at our districts. So the report is going to be there, and it is what it is.
Thank you. Trustee Calvin?
It is what it is. I don't know if I can really speak to the report. It's just one thing after another. Weeks and months of investigations, accusations, ending in one trustee getting escorted out of the building. It's just embarrassing. Hopefully one day we can get past this. And act like the public officials and high-paying administrators that we should. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Moran?
No comment.
I'm allow any other trustee to make one last comment before I make my closing statement. Wait a minute. Let me give up.
I will be very quick.
Well, there's a third, but I'm second.
Trustee Nuttall, I would like to apologize to you publicly for the humiliation that you went through. And I hope that you will accept my apology to you.
Thank you. Trustee Jones?
Thank you. I understand the need when situations arise to follow proper protocol. I do think that with respect to policy, we do need to take another look at the standards across all these different categories of individuals, whether they're employees, whether they're chiefs, whether they're trustees, whether they're external stakeholders, community members, volunteers, whatever. I think that our whole community is so precious to us, and any tear in the fabric destroys the whole. I do want to correct something Trustee Nuttall said. I've never been the subject of an investigation. I've only been the target of situations where I've been personally attacked and I was silent on it. I did nothing wrong, but I got attacked. And that was wrong. And I've never received an apology. Although I fairly and objectively looked at the situation in the broader context and made decisions that were appropriate for this board at that time. It's now a year and a half later, and I am beyond troubled. Superintendent Miles, that the relationship building that was promised hasn't happened. I have worked with you closely on a number of issues in the community. I have gone and done nearly 5 town hall meetings within the last year. in partnership. I have shown up to just about every event in support of this district and our leadership. I have always respected the chain of command, and I have always respected the work of our leadership and the importance of it. But when I watch a fellow trustee singled out or attacked, as has been a dynamic here, I have to say, no mas, no more. And when some of those people making allegations against that trustee are themselves under investigation, I have to be somewhat curious about that dynamic as well. It just doesn't smell right. The only way to move beyond all of this is for leaders to be real leaders. Lapses in judgment, poor judgment, ineffective judgment, failed judgment, especially when you're being paid to make that judgment, is something that this body cannot tolerate. This board was never informed of this investigation. I'm grateful that it was sent to an outside independent firm. I'm grateful that we have a professional report. But I'm more troubled by the fracturing of trust, by the undermining of respect, and by this gamesmanship that seems to go on, which we simply need to move beyond, and we cannot tolerate anymore. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Solis? Okay.
Yeah.
Trustee
I just
Bingham.
have a clarifying question for Jack, because I know Trustee Nuttall said that she had a lawyer. Was the lawyer paid for by the district or by? Yes. Okay, so the district did pay for her lawyer. She was not out any personal money.
I said district.
Okay, thank you.
Personal pain.
Trustees, I appreciate your comments on this issue. Some may think that it all began on October the 13th at about 6:30 a.m. And some may say that it started there because approximately a week or so later, on October 21st and 22nd, we received letters from employees, coincidentally, at about the same time. Those letters were forwarded to the legal department. If I'm not mistaken, they were forwarded to you by the superintendent. So these three letters were presented to the superintendent, and then the superintendent presented them to the legal department. They were all stamped in on October 29th. From that time, as I recall from the reports, the legal department decided to initiate this investigation. Unlike what the internal audit is taking its time to decide how much and how far to go with the HCM, and unlike the superintendent taking at least 2 weeks to decide what to do with the information that he had learned, the legal department decided immediately to call in an outside investigator. I'm very disturbed that we have taken this route. I'm very disturbed that we didn't take time to come to the board and talk to the board about one of its members. I'm very disturbed that we are taking this time out yet once again with yet another investigation. This district has to get beyond all of these investigations. We have got to get beyond looking over each other's shoulder, accusing each other of things. We have got to start working together, and until we start working together, we will continue to tear each other apart. It will continue to be us versus them. Superintendent Miles, you may remember when you first came here, I was always about let the board work with the top level administrators. Let us get to know each other. We need to work together. I still feel that the administration, the top level administration, need to have a good working relationship with the board members. I think until we have that type of working relationship, we will have this division horseshoe, and that's the line. You guys on the other side. And it does not have to be that way. Mike, it does not have to be that way. Justin, we don't have to be enemies. We do not have to be us against them. We are working for the same. We are working for the same 160,000 plus kids. We are working for the same nearly 20,000 employees. We are working for the same community, this Dallas community. We have got to stop working against each other. Miguel, I implore you to bring us together as a board with the top level administration so we can stop the bickering, stop the attacks, stop the investigations. This does no good for the children of Dallas ISD. And if there's nothing else, at approximately 12:19, I'll call this meeting.
I'd like to adjourn if you don't mind.
You're welcome to adjourn it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Blackburn, I appreciate your comments as well, and I agree with the spirit of the comments, the direction of the district that we need to head. This concludes the agenda for the called board meeting. The time is 12:18 a.m. and this meeting is adjourned.